All right. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Nice,
Sorry,
man. How you doing?
Joel. When I said, "Are we ready?" I actually had hit by accident
It was already
before
doing the
it was
countdown.
like already doing the countdown. I'm like, all
We're
right, well, I
super
mean,
professional here.
Yeah, no, totally. What's up, guys? How are you?
Good.
Good.
Yeah,
Good,
cool.
good.
Joel, welcome. Thank you for coming.
I'm delighted. I love sharing what I know about hypnosis and just answering questions in general about some of this stuff and meeting amazing people like you guys. So,
Oh man, we'll try to live up to that. We usually don't, but
We'll screw it up.
Yeah, we'll screw it up somehow.
we'll screw it up together, guys. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Sounds great.
It's all good.
So Joel Elfman, you and I and Tom are going to have a great conversation today. But before we get going, I just wanted to kind of say, I think it's one of the cool parts about this show is that when we started it, I had a vision in my head. I don't even know if it was a vision. It was more of an understanding of what health was and what everything else, right? So this stuff is health and this stuff is everything else. It never occurred to me that hypnosis would be on this list, but the more we've dove into this, the more I realized that like it is just one of what I now personally consider a pillar of health for things that you just need to like modify or sort of, bring into focus a little better or whatnot. And it's really cool to be able to talk to people in your position because I think it's such a new concept for me to even consider this in the health scope that
I'm going to answer the question. Just give me a second. I've got a little bit of allergies, so my eyes are tearing up. So you'll occasionally.
Yeah, it is that about that time of year again, which is weird because you think it wouldn't be allergy season, and yet here we are.
No, fall is horrible too. Yeah.
So I have a pretty expansive view of what hypnosis is, and all the aspects of health. So I literally called myself a body-mind hypnotist because I think the body is as important to our unconscious as our mind is. Like you can't try and be happy without smiling, or if your body is like really tense, or whatever, or if you're, kind of feeling depressed, you can't do happiness the same way. Right? So, and that's just one example. And people talk with their hands all the time, they breathe, their movement. When you're going towards something new, or something new jumps out at you, do you go forward? Do you lean forward, micro lean forward? Do you micro lean back? Our body is telling us so many things. And, even when you're stressed out, what's the natural way you handle it? Do you go for a run? Do you putter around the house, right? Again, we are brilliant at finding these, creating these patterns for ourselves, just kind of automatically creating them. And then we can examine them and see what's going on. Even something like a smoker, right? They're smoking because it's the best solution they found to solve a problem. Often stress or anxiety, but it could, and if they're an older smoker, it may be more socially acceptable, and that's how they got onto it. But still, if it wasn't bringing them some benefit, they wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and smoking, all those things are really good examples. When I started taking banjo like lessons years and years ago, and the first lesson, my banjo teacher looked at me and goes, "Look, man, one thing I love about this instrument is you can't play the banjo and not be happy. It's just like a really fun instrument, not like an electric guitar where you could turn up the reverb and distortion and be like, get into like a death metal vibe." He's like, "No, this isn't like, no one writes depressing ballads on a banjo. Like it's just not, it doesn't work." And I never, it's not something I would have gone into that experience, like kind of assuming, but once he said it, it immediately landed with me. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. This is kind of a bouncy, fun little thing. And you're right. If you are in a shitty mood, playing banjo is actually quite a bit harder. Like, it's just not like, and I don't know if that's because he planted that seed like literally day one, but I think he was totally right on the money. It's like, I got to be kind of in a good mood to play this thing.
And I really like the aspect of like, you presented smoking even as like self-medication, right? I'm doing something to cope with something else, right? And that's saying it's the best thing that I've found is much better than saying demonizing.
Or saying there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, they're like,
right,
why would you do that? It's so bad for you. Just saying, oh yeah, look, this is a coping strategy, and it's not good or bad. It's neutral, and maybe you don't want to do it.
And in the old days of hypnosis, when they were doing stop smoking, it was make a cigarette taste bad, blah, whatever. Again, they demonized it.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is if the problem still exists, if you're still anxious or stressed out, you're just going to find another way to cope. That's why a lot of people got, there was a tendency for people to get fat when they stopped smoking because they would use food.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
or you could go to
substituting.
Yeah, or they'd use sex or gambling or what they would find
some other dopamine fix there.
Exactly. So either we start to figure out how to reduce the stress, or I said we should figure out how to reduce the stress, and what's some coping mechanism they can begin to find. And again,
right,
the way I like playing with it is you're kind of doing this stuff, right? You're you're already doing some of this stuff in your body. You're showing in movement. What happens if we just take that movement and do something else with it? Maybe take a drink, or even that reach. What's something else you can reach for, right? Reach for.
Mm-hmm.
Reach for. I'm trying to show myself in the
range
of the screen.
It's a little screen. So
it's a little screen.
So okay, so much for that. And so can we play with some? Kind of an example of the same thing. A client who talks when she talks about feeling shame. Right? She would use this gesture, like the shame is coming right at her. Like direct. But here's the other interesting part. If we really kind of start to examine these things, right, it's not touching her, right? It's stopping an inch or two. So she's not fully taken into her body, and it's not touching her, and she's not collapsing around it, right? So this says something, well, it goes in a little bit, but at this point she's not taking it in as far as she could. But even with this, we can play with, in this particular situation, a little bit before she talked about exercises and getting back to tennis, and my kind of silly creative brain at times says, connected tennis. I said, why don't you stand up and imagine you have a tennis racket in your hand? And she literally reached behind her and pulled the tennis racket out from behind her couch.
Oh, that's funny.
like a physical tennis racket.
Yeah, physical,
this hypnosis.
Real tennis racket. Because I was just going to have to do it imagination, and then we played with imagine knocking this thing away and then sending it back to the person.
Yeah.
And the last iteration we did of this was imagine the court around you. Right? That's your personal boundary. And notice some of this doesn't land on the court, and you can ignore it. Right? So sometimes we don't have to do these formal trance things. And it's so it's live action. It's something you can easily do for yourself. It's easily repeatable, so you can play with it. Because a lot of this stuff is repetition, right? Building the new starting to find a new pattern, and then building it in. With everything all right, let me do this one thing and then give you space. Sorry, because I can talk to you.
No, you're fine, man.
So
yeah, I love it.
Most of this forms from one instant. Right? So there's one moment in time, a good habit, bad habit, whatever, good reaction, bad reaction. Right? So something happens, we're overwhelmed, our brain tries to figure out what to do. Comes up with a response. And then, because this thing made us feel danger, our unconscious is looking for stuff like that so we don't feel that level of danger again. Even if it makes us feel bad, I got, attacked at a social setting and people really picked on me, whatever. So, here's another party to go to. It's like, no, our brain, it's going to make you feel bad. It's going to make you feel bad, but it wants to avoid the level of pain it felt that other time. But the problem becomes that anytime something looks like a social setting, we can do this response. So from that one instance, we start to find other things that look similar so we can protect ourselves. And then potentially the pattern gets bigger and bigger. The same way you guys and everyone else has learned to get good at something is the same pattern, right? You found a useful response. And then, can I use it over here? And can I use it over here? And can I use it over, in this space? Like you're saying, how you've gotten more and more stuff that you've added to the podcast because you found out, oh, look, this parameter we've created, there's more layers to it than we thought, right? We can keep on adding this stuff on. So the problem becomes when we've overgeneralized. Right? We're using this automatic response for something that, realistically is quite different. Or again, social setting where if we went to that social setting, maybe we'd actually meet somebody. Maybe we'd make a great connection. Maybe we'd meet the love of our life. But we're reminded by that past, so we're avoiding the situation.
And I can't remember which one of the human biases that Daniel Kahneman had a really great codification of all the various biases in the human, psyche. And one of them was exactly that. And I can't remember the name he'd given to it, but it was basically saying like, we make those generalizations as a shortcut to a decision based on past experience. So you basically say like, I've done this enough times where I don't need a deep dive. It's not that important. I'm not prioritizing it as new information. I don't really care if I meet the love of my life. It's just a party. That's all and I guess one of the things that's infinitely like admirable in my mind about hypnotherapists in general is your guys' amazing ability to pick up on literally everything, right? Like every little movement, tick, breath, like it all seems important in the overall picture because you guys can use that, or you have to use that from my perspective. You guys almost have to use that to make any change happen, right? Like you were talking about this woman doing this. If you treated 50 women, same age, similar socioeconomic background, similar education background, just to try to make them almost the same as possible, no two of them would probably express that exact same way.
Right, exactly. And I will confess, there's stuff I miss.
Well, I know. I mean, listen, no one's perfect.
There's no one's going to be processing everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's times I miss. There's times don't click with clients. But the majority, try and create as safe a space as possible, and work with what they're giving, because you could talk. I mean, look at politics. Everyone's so strong in their viewpoint. You can't argue with these people. If someone has a phobia or, a belief that just seems ridiculous, like you can't argue with it. You have, you have to accept it. And I had a great example of that early on. So I'm doing one of those New Age expos, and a woman comes up to my table and says, I can't lose weight because I was sexually abused in a past life.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's a hot take, yeah.
And my brain is, no, for some reason, like, I'm not sure, I buy into that. Maybe I was scanning energetically or something else, or just, some small thing I was observing, or maybe I was young in my practice. Maybe she was right. So, okay. So, and I'm thinking, well, what can I do with her? And especially, she's right at my table, right? We're doing this thing out in public.
Yeah.
So I figured something very, very safe I could do with her, put in a bunch of safety protocols, make sure that, get out of this anytime you want, anytime you feel threatened or not feel safe. And I did something I didn't, you can do stuff where you don't even fully know the content of what's going on, but you're just saying, okay, for example, there's the thing like arm, I can't remember, it's you put somebody's arm and kind of just rigid, kind of get them a little bit of trance and gather up all the issues around the problem. And then you're going to release everything, and gather up all the solutions to the problem. And then you're going to start to integrate the solutions. This helps you solve the problem, and just let the arm release at the pace and speed that's right for you. And you can often see unconscious movement is jerky, right? It's a little bit of,
That's them sort of like testing the boundaries of that and kind of
so
coming
there's
back a little, leaving a little.
again,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of bounce in it. The person's going back and forth and thinking through
So
things.
even in that, it doesn't necessarily matter to you if you know like, let's say the root of the problem or even the problem itself, because you're saying like, look, you have this problem in your head and here's what we're doing.
Right. And you're going to say, okay, make sure this is safe for you. You're aligned with it. You're aligned doing with it this moment. And even though we're gathering this up at the moment, you can say the solution can start to manifest over time at the pace and speed that's right for you.
I love that kind of phrasing, right? Like that's just so gentle, right? I don't know how else to describe it.
It's so freeing. And again, I had a teacher at one point, hypnosis trainer, who did this. Like the client was absolutely ready to change, but it was going to create massive disruptions in his life with family or friends or whatever. And that was some of the wording he used. It's like, just let this, even though you're ready for it, right? To make sure it's, happens at the level that's right for you, right for your life, right for the people around you. Let it occur at the pace and speed, that works.
And hypnosis is often associated with things like that, like smoking or weight loss, right? But like you just said something that got me thinking, like, what if somebody's trying to grapple with, coming out of the closet or changing careers that they've been in, and they're like the CEO of a company or anything like that, that's like massively environmentally different for everyone around them, right? There's a million things I could think of now, and I'm like, it never occurred to me to associate those things with hypnosis as well.
Yeah, any change people want to make, and again, look at it, gather extra information if you need, take your time processing, but know that there's a different way to do it, and try it on. One of the interesting things for me, I think, as of late, past year or so, is, some of this, the change, even though we want it, we know it's going to create disruptions, right? We know it's going to potentially take a lot of energy. And, we've done things we thought that would work out in the past and they haven't. So even there's this fear, well, maybe it's not going to work.
I mean, I think there's always that fear, right? I mean, I think that could happen. Like, oh, if I cross the street in Times Square, I could get hit by a bus.
Right.
I mean,
so the invitation becomes for people just to try it on for a moment. See what it feels like. Notice what's good. Notice what's bad. Notice what might come up, and then just let it go. And then
I got hypnotized for smoking 18 years ago, and even back then they were doing something like that. It's like, what's it feel like to be a non-smoker? You're out at the bar with your friends and you're not having a cigarette. How does that feel? Like it was sort of like a let's take a spin real quick and see how this.
But try it on a couple times, right, before you make a decision on it. What the steps are, and then you can take on a piece of it. All change, for the most part, it's incremental. Sure. All the best change authorities say, what's the next smallest step? What's the little thing you can do that's going to then allow you to take the next step and the next step? And again, the great thing with hypnosis or visualization or trance or whatever you want to call it is that's what you get to do. You keep on getting to try it on, test it out. And you have to get good at this stuff. To really build that thing in, you have to develop the neural pathway, so you have to do it. And again, you want to test it in different ways. Oh, I'm going to walk up, it's like I'm going to walk up to that person and, it's going to be amazing. It's kismet, we're going to be lifelong partners. Are they going to come home with me or whatever, whatever it is. It's like, and then you go up to that person and, it's like an epic fail or something.
Yeah.
So, and I've had that experience. It's like walking away and being upset and all that. But once you start to practice, like all the different responses that you can get, then you're like one of those guys. Oh, person says, talk to the hand. And you go, hello, hand. How you doing? It's like, it just becomes a game. And if it doesn't work, then you're just on to the next person. It no longer, creates any hurts you. It no longer, because it doesn't affect your identity, about who you are. It's like that person. Okay, maybe they weren't right for me, or they weren't right at this moment, or whatever it is. It's like you no longer get that level of pain or upset if anyone that happens, but you've got to have all that experience. Again, it's how we got good at all the stuff we do is experience. So sometimes when I talk about hypnosis and trance, literally we're condensing experience. We're picking what we want to have, what the feeling we want when it happens, and we get to practice it as much as we want so we're prepared. Because that's what it is. Oh, this thing looks like that thing that happened to me, so now I can act this way. And, and even with a smoker, we'll test stuff out really thoroughly. Okay, what are some of the stressors you see? Let's up the stress, bit by bit, we'll up the stressor. So it's like, okay, 10 things are going on at once. 15 things are going on at once.
Right.
And yet you have all these ways of handling it so you can stay not smoke, so you can stay doing other things except smoking a cigarette. And I'll still tell them if 20 or 25 or 30 things come along, and the only thing that your brain can do in that moment is think about is smoking a cigarette, go do it. It doesn't, but I want to be really careful that it doesn't change your identity. Like you are now a non-smoker, and even though you smoke this cigarette in this one instant, that's what you did in this one instant. And you can stay a non-smoker because after it passes, then you can think of new ways to handle that better. And if not, maybe then there's another session required. But if you instantly think of yourself as a smoker, now you're potentially back down that path. But this has happened in this one situation, in this one context where so many things were happening, and that level you hadn't tested against, you hadn't prepared for it, right? So, but so that's why I'm a proponent of resilience of perfection. I mean, there's times I want people to fail. Isn't some of your most powerful resources, that you failed and then you had to learn from it and get back, get back on your feet?
Yeah, but it's super fucking irritating every time that happens. I just want to throttle somebody.
Horrible. Yeah.
But what happens if you could practice some of that? Oh shit! Like, oh, that's really fucked up. Okay, but you just did it. It's like, I went and approached that person, got slapped in the face, and everyone at the bar was laughing at me. Okay.
What's funny is just I think that's an interesting and tricky topic, right? Because I wouldn't care at all if a super smoking hot girl slapped me in the face to, reject my advances. That wouldn't hit my radar. But me landing flat at a TED Talk would absolutely fucking crush me. Like,
how the fuck did you bring up TED Talks? I literally just applied to speak in a TED Talk. like
maybe
why
that's
would you
why.
do that to me?
Maybe that's why. But you know what I'm saying? Like, so my trigger, not only as a hypnotherapist, not only do you have to figure out what my problem is, but then you got to figure out what are my real catastrophic, moments versus my and honestly, I think it's very weird to not be upset by a hot woman, rebuffing you at a bar, right? That feels dejecting on almost every level. It wouldn't bother me at all.
That's cool. So whatever your past has, said, okay, that's fine. Whatever they did would, happen.
No, but I guess what I'm saying is that's tricky because most people would probably come into your office and that would be a reasonable assumption to make, right?
Well, I'm not going to make assumptions. I don't want to make assumptions though. I mean, you can't help it. We're human, but whatever the issue is for you, it'd be okay. So let's practice what could go wrong in a TED Talk and how do you how do you handle it?
Asking for a friend, Tom.
You still got to get the damn thing first,
Yeah.
But the thing is, the more you practice, also, the more you're aware, you'll catch it in the moment. So potentially nobody even notices it. I literally do a thing with clients I call emotional muscle building, which is how do you, what's a good state? What's the problem state? How does it, and not that I want to know, because most people do that too well, but I want to at least know how it starts. And then how do you come back? And then go back to the good state. And literally for me, I call it muscle building because that's like one rep.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Right?
So you
and
do
then
a
we do the
couple
next
reps.
rep. Positive, negative, positive. And every time you do it, you get better at the positive. It can get stronger and it gets more subtle instead of having to do joy like, I can do it from here and I do it from here. And then I can do it more and I can step into it more and more subtly. So no one even knows how I do it. And then it's like, I'm being nice. And then it's like, oh yeah, I'm like, I don't want to do the crazy happy face, but But you know what I mean? I step into that good feeling more and more easily. And the more I practice how I fall off, I get to notice the nuance of it more and more so I can start to catch it and come back. And again, that's why I always love the phrase resiliency over perfection.
And if you're able to be resilient in that sense, then the fall off is A, not nearly as catastrophic, and B, the recovery is much quicker, I would imagine, right?
And I also like that because the other part is, look what we're doing. We're framing, positive on either end. And this little problem just happens somewhere in the middle. And it doesn't, at some point it's going to go away and we're kind of going back to positive.
So I wanted to ask this earlier and I forgot, and then it came up again in that last passage, but like, how hard is it for you as a hypnotherapist to sort of bail on your own assumptions? Like we talked about the Kahneman stuff earlier, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, if 20 guys come into your office, 19 and a half of them probably are terrified of women at a bar in that case, right? Like that's a normal fucking thing for men to have, right? And if you get that one dude who's like completely not in there, like if you came in cocked and ready to go with this like sort of like norm, I guess you might call it at that point, like that's not going to help that person, right?
But I still want to know what's going on specifically for them. I can't do cookie cutter form.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is that hard to kind of put like stuff down every single patient you have? I got to imagine that's tough. Or is that just muscle memory? You just learn how to do it.
I'm not in this business to do cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
Because I love being creative as well. So every person gives me a new opportunity. Like, who would have thought of, pulling out a tennis racket? So Wednesday night, a friend and I do a monthly energy healing and guided meditation. So at the end of it, person who showed up, he sensed into it, says, you still have some issues in the back of your heart in that energetic field, and and he did some clearing and cleaning of those. And once again, my kind of my creative brain goes, I have this idea. What happens if you go buy some of those treats, like the sweet and sours, okay? And I want you to open up the bag and take them out one by one, and I want you to put a bucket in front of you or literally behind you, right? And I want you to think each one represents some old heartbreak and just toss them. Toss them into the pail. Right?
That's cool.
Right? And people,
neat little visual and a physical attachment to that thought.
Exactly. So it's like, and that obviously is not going to work for everybody. But for some people, it's like, do I toss it this way? Or literally, do I just, toss it
behind you? Yeah.
And then the wacky part of my brain's going, what does it say about somebody if they want to go backwards versus forward versus side?
Right. This is often I'm putting this now, making sure I'm putting
behind
it
me.
Yeah.
This is different.
Or even like, how perfectionist are they? Like if they miss the bucket, like
are they going
to stop what they're doing and go pick it up and like put it in there? You could probably learn a lot about somebody in that single exercise.
Do they want to put it in there? Do they need a taste component? Do they want to, put it in their mouth for a moment or two before tossing? And I mean, there's
what does that mean? Does that mean they just want one last taste of it before they get rid of it forever?
Or maybe
does it mean they're curious?
It heightens the connect. It heightens.
It makes it more.
It makes
tangible.
It more real for them, more tangible before they toss it away. It helps trigger, right, the memory, and it makes it easier or for some people, maybe harder to send away. So all this stuff we get to play with. There's no set way to do this. There's no set way to do this at any time. And actually, it's funny when you're talking about assumptions. I thought you were going to the question, well, how do you do work on yourself? It's like, oh my God, it's so hard at times.
Well, I mean, we definitely were going to end up there at some point, so we can dive into that. Like, we were going to come around to that because, I mean, look, it's a lot. You could pick any job on the planet, right? Like, what do they say? Comedians are some of the most depressed, dysfunctional humans on earth, right? Like, but why is that? It's because like their coping mechanism is to tell jokes about shit that's like crushing their soul, right? Like, and there's always this like direct relationship between pain and expression, right? Like it's very, very, very tightly woven together.
Most healers and coaches came to it through having their own issues or the wounded.
Correct.
They call the wounded healer syndrome or some other version of it. And look, again, some people find it easy as they do this stuff to make changes on their own. Other people find it harder. I found it very challenging at times. I've made recordings for myself and, done other stuff. And it's like, damn.
So, Joel, do you think, and people ask if I do acupuncture on myself, and I say it's like trying to give yourself a massage, right? You can do it, but it's much better if you're passive and somebody else is there.
Right.
Do you find that if you have like a friend that you go to for hypnosis, that it works better than if you're trying to self-hypnotize?
For me, yes. I think at times, I mean, certain things I can do, but at times, yes, I have to go to somebody else. Because remember, your unconscious is at least half a second ahead of your conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So your pattern potentially is getting in the way.
You see it coming.
Yeah. You see it coming and you're like, nope.
See, you're unconscious.
You're the one doing it to yourself.
Exactly. Your unconscious sees it coming, going, no, we're not gonna,
Yeah.
But and the problem,
I know that trick.
The problem again is your brain. I saw this article once and I've never seen it again, but it's like that 3 primary motivations, always towards good. We could say, positive feeling, but food, sex, and we could be talking about something as simple as a single cell organism, right? Away from danger, injury, heat, cold, whatever the threat is. The third motivation is to do it as effectively and efficiently as possible with as little extra effort so that you have more energy for the next thing that you don't even know what's going to happen that may show up. And again, we only have so much glucose in our brain. So we know what to do, like for diet, right? Oh, okay, I'm going to spend like 2 hours and make this incredible meal, and it'll be so healthy and so amazing for me. Or I'm tired, I can stop at the pizza place down the corner.
Yeah.
It's going to give me some fuel. Okay, it's some extra calories. But you know what? It's solving the problem right here, right now. I know how to do it. I know pretty much what the cost is, and I accept the cost for it. So I'm going to go, take that solution. So how do we do it? How do we make the change? So again, that's why small incremental change is great, because the energy cost isn't that high to make the change, and we can monitor it along the way, and all of And the other interesting part with some of this stuff is sometimes we're just ready. We just need that one trigger, that one kick that all of a sudden allows a whole big set of things to change. But I think often that's been prepped along the way, just in our unconscious, and then we hit that one little bit piece.
So I have 2 things on that. One is just a reflection on something you said about the wounded healer thing. I think one of the other really big surprises in my mind, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but almost everyone that's come on this show, super qualifies. Like, almost everyone. And honestly, Joel, we obviously deal with a little bit off the beaten path type folks a lot of times, right? And, maybe that's just a symptom of that type of thought, that draws that kind of person that was willing to kind of like see through their trauma into a better spot. And that's definitely a personality type, right? Or a mental trait.
But I think it happens a lot. Think of somebody who became a police officer.
I mean, it happens exclusively on this show. I can tell you.
I mean, almost every guest has like a creation story that was a significant thing that they had to overcome.
Right. I mean, I was really shy and nervous, and I wasn't until my 40, until about 40 that I started doing hypnosis. So yeah, a lot of years, being more anxious or afraid than I needed to be. But if you
it's funny because you present not super like extroverted, you're not waving your hands around and yelling and screaming, but you also definitely don't strike me as like a shy guy either, right? Like it's like, yeah, you might not be like the Tony Robbins type, but you certainly don't look like a wallflower to me either. You don't present
put me
like
up against that super hot woman, and maybe
may
or may not approach. So there are places where you're gonna, I'm gonna find, we're gonna find. But I think again that inspiration is there. Think about, police officer. Why did he become a police officer or a firefighter? Often it was something happened, or they saw something happen. They wanted to in the future to protect. Right. Again, a lot of people go into the army. So there's, I think, a lot of creation stories out there. Like there was a trigger, and then you look at people, who just decided they wanted to make money, or they thought it'd be interesting. They became lawyers or doctors, and then 5 years in, maybe they graduated, maybe they didn't, and they say, "No, this career isn't for me." Or they spent all that money on law school and medical school and say, "Yeah, nope. I have to go. Need to go do something else."
I mean, talk about like needing to be freed. I mean, can you imagine dumping in to the nut that is law school and then coming out being like, "Nah, fuck that. This is not."
I will.
And I know two people that have actually done that, and I've never broached it with them because I feel like it's just such a tragic story that they do not want to revisit.
That's a lot of debt. On the other hand, it is an amazing training that can serve you incredibly well in
a lot of other fields.
In lots of other fields.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is a lesson I try to pass on to my kids. I said, everything I've ever done in my life, even if it has nothing whatsoever to do with anything, always comes back to help me somehow, some way, right? Like always, like 100% of the time. It's never not been the case. And I've quoted this book on this show a million times, but Moonwalking with Einstein, one of the things that they talked about in that book, which was amazing, is that these memory palace guys, and in by extension, every human, even if they don't hone it like that, you can't really learn something new unless you bind it to something you already know, right? Like, so there's this idea. So quite literally, the more you know, the more you can know. And so I always use that as an example because I'm like, look, man, if you want to be smarter, all you have to do is start learning stuff. Anything. It doesn't even matter what it is. Like, it almost does not matter at all. Like,
yeah. And they say often the best way to learn is to go in, with that child's mind. Like, because I like put everything aside, but that's incredible. That's incredibly difficult for
it's Herculean. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be. And then I think sometimes there are people who are good at it, but most of us, probably, probably not.
I don't think anybody's intrinsically good at that though. Like, and then you had actually, the second part of my earlier question was around this idea of being ready, which kind of dovetails into this, right? Like, in order to do that fluently, you've used this in this call too, and I've in our previous conversation, it's muscle memory. It's a rep at a gym, right? Like, you have to actually practice that. No one's born good at this, right? Like, it's just not part of our nature.
You could. I mean, you could in one instant. Like, think about the golfer, first time golfer who hits a hole in one or something. So sometimes you know nothing, so your body just responds automatically. But how often does that really happen? So,
it never happens. And even if you take that example, the guy hits a hole in one and he's super psyched, everyone's buying him shots, but like, he doesn't know how he did it, right? So he can't replicate.
Yeah, there's no.
Right?
Yeah, there's no.
That's what I was going to say.
And the other 17 holes could have been absolute horror shows.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because he's trying to replicate it, and know how to do it. Tim Galloway, right? Inner Game of Tennis was his first book, and he wrote ones about golf and skiing and some other stuff. Is literally, he would try and have people let go of everything they know. So he would just have them bounce a tennis ball and then just try and let the body do what it knows to do to hit it. And that's how he would start.
But that's fighting that's not just fighting your own worldview and life experience, but it's also fighting Tom and I talked about this on our last show, this inherited knowledge that we got from everybody who's ever lived before me in my line, right? Like every piece of knowledge in my cellular makeup is telling me to do the exact opposite of that. It's like
I can see that being very um very necessary, especially if you got like something like the yips, which is like I mean, it takes people out of professional sports careers because now the thing that they did that was so basic for years and years and years, and even if they trained it and they got better and better, now all of a sudden if they go to do it, they're completely fucking it up. To take them back to that innocent childlike state where that programming isn't there, where that yip got in, seems important.
Well,
But
that's where
yeah.
trance can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because what is happening in the prefrontal lobe as you go into trance is that automatic decision making that says, oh, this is the way I'm supposed to respond now,
Mhm.
whatever it is starts to slow down or can actually turn off.
Oh.
So then you can start to layer in something new, or you can remind them of what they did. But you've got to be able to start to take that step back.
So Joel, is it always like replacing, like, say, one of these neural pathways with something else? Is it like, all right, we're gonna disconnect this wire and reattach something else for a little bit more physical sounding than it is, but that playing with that neuroplasticity like that. Is it a replacement? Is it a substitution? Is it no, that's still there, we just have a stronger connection over here?
Well, I mean, there's stuff we want to reinforce. Right?
Yeah.
And there's stuff if you're really, really good at, like, for example, think about something you might have been struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
And now imagine there's a layer of energy meridians. Like this, it's almost like a body. It's a layer of energy meridians and energy points, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can just apply a needle, some idea or thought or something to that to release the block that's been getting in your way.
I gotcha. Okay.
Right. So I'm tapping into something where you have hundreds and thousands of hours of experience to help you get a solution. We're taking that brilliant skill set you have and applying it in a new place. Because why necessarily limit it? Right?
Yeah,
if that's what you know, if that's what you know how to do,
right?
Why should we only let's at least try it in a different context? There's a story of a old NLP story where a guy came to a neurolinguistic programming practitioner and said, oh, I have this problem, I'm a problem solver. And he goes, okay, so how do you do it? He goes, this is the old days. I put up 10 TV screens and I put the problem on each screen and I wait for one of the screens to pop out a solution. Great. So they talked for a while and blah, 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 and did some work. They ended up with 100 screens on a lazy Susan. And now he could put up multiple problems and just have more screens and more time. And he didn't have to wasn't overwhelmed by 100. Probably if he just had 100 staring at him, that would have been too much. So he puts it on the lazy Susan so his unconscious can move, at whatever pace. Think again, what's the pace that it's turning, right? That's just right for him. So his brain is working in all these brilliant ways with this brilliant visualization and able to pop out more solutions. And the reason I'm telling you a story is then, okay, so are we done? That's great. Anything else? He goes, well, I have this problem with my wife. And the practitioner goes, well, why don't you just put it on the screens? And the guy goes, oh, no, those are for work.
Oh, that's funny.
Right?
That's funny.
And he actually started doing that in college before he ever worked for these people. But again, that's the idea that somehow we limit these amazing resources we have to specific places. Why can't we, again, what happens if we open them up? What happens if we bring them over here? Can they help us out?
And that's such a bias 101 thing right there, because I think people do that all the time at every level possible, right? Like they'll say like, oh, I see this in networking groups. Joel, I know you're heavy into the networking scene too. So you've heard this one before, right? You're sitting in a room 20, 30 people, all going around the horn, telling people what their, story is, who they're looking to meet, whatever. And then somebody says, well, here's a way that, I got some more efficiencies if you're looking for that. Right. And they're like, oh, you don't understand. In my business, it's different. No, it's not. It's never different in your business. Like ever. Like it's never like unless there's something that you do, like you are a avalanche rescue person who only rappels off the side of mountains, like that you truly do have a unique job. Like most other jobs, let's call them cubicle jobs or office jobs in general, like it's not that different. Like it's really not. This is your own bullshit getting in your way, nothing else.
And there can be unique elements, but yeah, there's usually some overlap.
I'm glad you said that, because I literally hopped off as I did the Goldman Sachs Small Business Program, and our cohort is kept together, and completely different industry. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know that problem. Yeah. And Matt and I met through a business group, and I remember talking to Joe, who was the organizer, and he goes, look, man, your problems are the same as every other business. You just move that decimal place left or right. That is it.
Yeah.
That is it. You guys, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, your problems are their problems, vice versa. It's a magnitude of scale.
Right. And it's human beings can only operate in so many ways. That's why they tend to say there's nothing under the, nothing new under the sun. Yeah. So it's all similar. It's just how can we relate to it? How can we find those common elements? And or sometimes how can we take a new viewpoint? Right. Like a lot of times, some of those are the commercials that have the most impact. Right. All of a sudden they put a spin on something. It's like,
sure.
I hadn't thought about it that way. Or some of the great writers or, guys who become multi-talented, as speakers or communicators, theorists, coaches, however you want to say it. They like, how can we look at this just from a slightly different angle?
Yeah.
I got a sort of a weirder question here. I just watched the movie Kodachrome, which I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it, but it's a really cool movie. Actually, it's with oh man, I can't remember the guy who was in that Nick Cage movie, Escape from Alcatraz. He was the bad guy in that movie. I can't remember his name. Ed Harris, Ed Norris, Harris. Yeah. But he's this dying photographer, and he has this film on Kodachrome. He only does it. And the last lab in the world is processing the last batches of Kodachrome film in Kansas. And I looked this up. This actually was a real story, not him. Mm-hmm. The guy who actually did it was the dude who took that picture of that really iconic woman in Pakistan on the cover of National Geographic.
Yeah, with the blue eyes.
Yeah, with the super beautiful eyes and whatnot. So that guy actually was the real life guy who processed the very last roll of Kodachrome. Sorry, he bought the last roll of Kodachrome film. The guy who owned the lab processed the last roll for himself. But anyway, one of the comments in that movie, and he's like this prototypical old school artist, right, from a bygone era. And he said, he's like, Kerouac, Dali, and he names all these people. He goes, none of these people would have been them without this immense pain, this immense inner struggle, right? Like that was what made them them. This is a really extreme example, obviously, those guys, but like what happens if you saw Kerouac on your couch, right? And you're trying to hypnotize something out of him? Like, is it possible, or do you ever get a sense that like maybe this problem isn't necessarily as much of a problem, but like maybe more of a motivator that needs rounding out a little bit? Because I would hate to see Kerouac like de-problemed, right? Like, I mean, that seems like way less interesting.
I think it's their choice. I mean,
sure.
Society might lose something from it, but it's their choice whether they want. It's always going to be their choice whether they solve the problem or not. I can't make somebody do something they don't want to do is the standard commentary. And for the most part, it's true. But there are times where we can, and anybody can do this linguistically, right? Slip something in. So to start to help somebody pivot in ways that they might not be aware of. But again, if it's going to run right up against that value or whatever's important to him, you're not winning that fight.
Right.
There's no way. The only way to win those fights is to brainwash someone. And that takes,
But that takes more than a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to lock them away, and you got to,
Yeah, that's control, like cult behavior.
Yeah,
and stuff.
you got to control them for days or whatever. And sure, then, then you can maybe create anything you want. On the average, this is why, stage hypnotists, for the most part, they're always testing people. See, I hate the word suggestible, but who's willing to go along for whatever reason?
Right.
Yeah. Like there are people like, no way, because the part about stage hypnosis that I don't like is that common stage shows says, oh, I'm the hypnotist and I'm going to control your brain, right? Ooh, kind of thing. But that's not the way it works. It's like they test people. Okay, who's willing to go along? And you see most people, well, a lot of people, I was aware of what was happening, but it was okay. Or, it's like, I don't remember a thing. Or, he made me do it. Yeah.
I'll bet you. I'd be curious to see how many of those people who said they don't remember a thing actually did and are just embarrassed that they were clucking like a chicken.
Could be.
Or took
Well,
their
again,
shirt
it's a
off
very, very different state. Right? So it may be your brain has trouble connecting those memories. So it could be true. It could be exactly the way you say it. It could be like, well, the easiest way to get out of this is
yep.
Remember, or
I got nothing.
They were in control or whatever. It's like, I knew what was happening, but I didn't want to embarrass the guy. But the other part of it is you may notice like a lot of stage shows, like they have a whole bunch of subjects and then he's working with them and he starts to narrow the subjects he's working with.
Yeah.
And a couple people over there just sitting there in the chair drooling on the person next to him. Because the stage hypnotist has noticed, like some of these people, there's some little hesitation on the part of
right, and that's not going to play well at a show.
Or they're not acting it out, like, fully loud screaming, that makes a good show. So those people, all right, just stay up there and we'll put you on the side for a while. So only the best of the best who are willing to go along with suggestions, will be there performing. There's a wonderful video of a young hypnotist on, I think it's like the Santa Monica Pier, and he's working with a set of young twin, like college-age girls, teenagers. And one of them is going along with the suggestions really well, and the other one's kind of half-hearted. And she goes, well, what's the difference? Well, you have to believe. So for a minute, he says, okay, imagine your foot is totally stuck to the pier. And he gave, one other two suggestions. And in that moment, when she was willing to take on the suggestions, she couldn't move her foot. But the minute she went back to her old attitude, it was like,
gone.
It wasn't as strong for her. So it's what are you willing to take on? And again, that's the test. Like, how can we make suggestions or begin, people begin to try stuff on, right? So that's a big, like, all right, let's begin to test this out. Like, begin to try it on, see what feels right. And some people are against the verb try because it implies failure, right?
Yeah, potential failure.
Yeah. Or actually, okay, try this means, try lifting this.
Well, try it. You could win it.
Try it means I'm not succeeding, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But, I think sometimes you want to be careful with that word, and other times I don't know it matters. And other hypnotists will say, like, I want you to just take this on fully. So people will be comfortable taking it on, and some people and really feel what it's like, and then then they can fully absorb it, or they learn to keep on coming back to it. Or for other people, you've got to do incremental steps.
Yeah.
And it's just what's right for the person, and it's going to vary. And again, sometimes it's going to be 5 steps forward and 2 steps back, and then whatever the mix is. Always have to pay attention to the person, right? And a lot of times these days, I'm kind of using this infinity, like the infinity symbol. It's like conscious, unconscious, mind and body, and even rest and work, or rest and effort. In embryology, how we develop, the first movement by a baby is actually yield and push. So there has to be some slack in the system for you to do the next thing.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Right. So it's interesting to think about that. It's some of what is trance doing, right? It's creating some relaxation in the system, maybe a little bit of distance from what's going on, so we can create that space to then, for you to be comfortable taking the next action.
And this is what I love talking about with you, or why I love talking to you, Joel. You have such a wide background of influences. I know you've got some martial arts in you, you've got some meditation in you, you've got some of this. And it's just funny because I do think that you wouldn't be the therapist you are without all of those things. And so like to try to remove one or the other. And that's what I think is great about having, like, you're not the first hypnotist we've talked to, but you're certainly the first and probably only that has your point of view on this. And like, that's one of the aspects of this process that I've really come to appreciate is like, everyone brings like a different set of valuable skills to the table. And, yours is very physical in my interpretation, right? And I do like that because I don't know, even when you were doing that arm thing, right? Like that's a real visceral way to say, look, I'm taking this. And in yoga, you do the same thing, right? You bring the light of the universe with open palms into your heart center and you literally push it into your sternum, right? Like that's like a very common thing. And like I remember to this day, my first yoga class where they did that. And I just could feel myself beaming with an energy, right? You're like, I literally just grabbed all this energy that was around me and shoved it right into my heart. Like, and you're like, oh yeah.
Listen, I think it is really cool to do to do deep trance and, just encourage people and they go on their own journey. And to a certain extent, we have no idea what's happening. They could be listening to us. They could be going on their own thing entirely. And yet they'll come out with it. If you use the appropriate language, give them lots of space with your language, then they'll come up with amazing things. But I also just really, really love this simple, practical stuff that you can kind of watch what's happening in the world, in the moment, and you can notice for yourself, and you keep on coming back to it and practicing it. There's a guy out of England who was talking about, that homunculi of like your senses, like and it's like or kinesthetics, so like your hands and lips and mouth are huge and the rest of your body is really, really
tiny,
really tiny thin. So he has a piece where he has you go think about a problem, right? And just imagine holding it in your hands and you just manipulate your hands until you come up with a solution. That's it. That's the trance. Like,
I mean, I do that without trance 100 times a day. Like,
I think it's embodying the mental aspects of it, right? You're giving it a physical thing and you're able to have something to actually work with. I think that's a great way around it. Yeah.
They call this whole thing like embodied cognition.
Yeah.
Or what's the stuff? Or again, how does your brain imagining you move? Yes, I got introduced to some of the movement. So I'm studying right now with a person who's done somatic movement therapy for about 50 years now. And so again, it's just so interesting to learn all these different pieces.
I mean, would they be willing to have a conversation? I'd love that.
We get them on the show.
I love that idea quite a bit.
She is a busy person, but I am more than happy to arrange it. You can look
somatic movement seems like a really neat territory to explore. For sure. Like that just seems interesting.
And so, yes. And so now, and it's just probably too long to go into this, all these elements from it. It's like, a Laban movement analysis has a code. They created a code for dancers. Like what all the, what code, how can we notate each movement? But again, what are some of the movements and what do they represent? Are they direct going at something? Are they indirect? And what are the emotional implications of some of these movements? So I've been, because I'm so new at some of it is still challenging to figure out exactly how it relates and how the movement and what they call efforts, right? So there's weight, time, space, and
I trust you.
Anyway,
it's okay. It's all right. We believe you.
Yeah, and also they say weight is like sensing gravity coming up and down, right? Space is more side to side, deciding and intuiting, right? Flow is flow. Oh, time, right? So time, is it smooth or is it staccato? So I was reimagining for a moment with somebody an old NLP exercise where, again, you imagine a situation of confrontation and then you step outside and be the observer and then notice what you notice. But then you can also be the observer in some of the 4 archetypes. So what happens if you take on the warrior persona? What does that tell you? And then you can even step into the other person, or you can step into the warrior persona and bring it, and step into the situation from the warrior persona. But then you could do it as the trickster or the wizard or the earth mother, or like each one gives. But the interesting, like, what are the inherent qualities? Like,
we've had a bunch of people on the show for IFS and parts therapy and stuff like that. So we've had a lot of conversations around that.
A lot of
like
that.
Super cool rabbit hole to go down, because it's just.
It's like, okay, warrior. Well, that's like, what are the qualities? Direct, and probably what they call bound versus free. But it's like it's some of those are like Earth Mother probably she's not free, and she's certainly not, like she's somewhere in the middle between bound and free. And again, she's maybe embracing, so maybe that's an indirect movement, but the energy is probably direct, right? She's giving love and support, or maybe it is just all indirect and all encompassing. So how do you evaluate some of this stuff? Becomes anyway, so that's
right. Well, Joel, listen, man, I could talk to you all day, but I got to find out how to get people in touch with you and all that neat stuff. Otherwise, we gotta make sure people can find you. Because I mean, honestly, I love what you do, how you explain it, how you interact, like how you show up to a conversation like this. I mean, everything about it, I think, is awesome. So how do we lay it on us?
BodyMindHypnotic.com is the website, and BodyMindHypnotic@gmail is probably the easiest email.
Cool.
And I'm also on Facebook as Joel Elfman, and LinkedIn is Joel Elfman. So they should come up pretty easily. You'll usually see a picture of me.
Doing your
pointing.
That's funny. I think that's awesome, and I think I definitely we're always trying to help our guests kind of get out there in the world further and farther, and let everybody kind of experience what we get to do here. So it's going to be great to
totally
share
appreciate it. Even these couple minutes of sharing this stuff, for me, it's my life work. It's fascinating. I think everyone should know some pieces of this. Even to business person, I'm recommending either what they call conversational hypnosis or
that's cool,
or neuro-linguistic programming, because it just tells you, it just teaches you how to communicate with people more effectively. We're not trying to control minds, but whatever we're doing, we are trying to persuade people, right? Yeah. And how can we do it in an elegant way that helps our values align together?
Joel slid in a little life lesson, a secret life lesson there. He's like, it's my life's work, but you didn't start the life's work until you were in your 40s. So there's a little bit of
do it whenever.
There's a little bit of a lesson in there hiding, right? In plain sight, where, you don't have to have this shit figured out when you're 19 or 25 or even 39, right? Like there's opportunity to find that path, like at any point, which I think is something we all fucking lose track of. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And how many people, especially these days, right? Second, third careers, so I think that's becoming more and more.
Tom and I have talked about this 20 times with lifespans going up. Like,
what are you going to do?
Let's say if you live to 110, you could have 3 30-year marriages. And
easily.
4 multiply decade long careers. You could have the options go way different when you look at it through that lens. So it is definitely something that's more and more relevant to where we're at.
Right. And think about, Jimmy Carter, right? Peanut farmer.
Yeah.
Eventually the president, and then all the things he did. Habitat for Humanity.
A couple things in the middle there between peanut farmer and president. But
absolutely. But
a few stops on that train before there.
So
but
a couple different careers. And then,
All right, man. Listen, Joel, awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for coming again. Joel Elfman will put all the notes in the show notes and whatnot. And,
great talking
man,
to you guys.
You guys have a killer weekend.
Too.
You too.
All right, take care.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.